Well, in a previous video, we reviewed how to create a grid document in Photoshop from scratch. And in this video, we're going to take a quick look at how to do it by downloading a template file from the 960.gs website. So we're in Photoshop now. Let's hop over to the web, and here I am on the 960.gs site. You'll notice in the upper left corner here we have a download option. And this includes a whole bunch of template files that we can use in different programs to speed up the process of using a 960 grid system. I'm going to click to download this file, and once it's downloaded, I'll open it up. It is a zip file, so we'll uncompress it, come over to our Finder, and pull up the file here, jump into it. Okay, so we have a bunch of different folders. We're going to go into templates. And from there we have folders for a bunch of major programs. We'll come into Photoshop and see that we have 3 files. One for a 12-column grid, one for 16, and even a 24-column version of the 960 grid system. Well, we're going to work with 12 for demonstration purposes, so I'll open up that file and double-click it to get it into Photoshop. Okay, so here we are in Photoshop with our template file from the 960 website, and this saves us the trouble of creating all of our guidelines. Now, creating guidelines is a really good tool to know how to use, because if you wanted to use a grid system outside of 960, and that certainly is a reasonable thing to do once you get further into web design, you may not find a template file that's already been created. Also, there are times when it's helpful to create horizontal lines as part of grid systems, so it's good to know how to manipulate those guidelines. Now that we're working with this template file, though, let's focus on customizing it to really suit our needs a little bit better. And I'm zoomed in here, so let me get back out and see what we're really dealing with. So I'll go to 25%. Okay, and if you've looked at the video or if you've experimented with creating your own custom grid file, you'll know that we went with something a little bit larger, especially on the height. And I want to give ourselves a little more room to work with here, so we're not limited to this square region. So we can go up to image and down to image size, and I'm going to change the height all the way up to 2400 pixels, which is the value we reviewed in the tutorial for creating a custom grid file from scratch. Okay, that's good. So now I have a little more space to work with. You'll notice also, compared to our custom file, that we don't have a whole lot of room on either side, just a little bit more than the 960 width that the grid system provides. I find it helpful to have a little extra space, though, so we can have a better sense of how our design looks when it's resting inside of a browser, where it's almost certain to have a little extra padding on either side of the design. Now, to do this, we can actually change the size, not of the image, but of the canvas. If we change the size of the image, it's going to stretch the width of each one of our columns, and we don't want that to happen. So we can come up to image and then down to canvas size, and I'm going to change that to 1200 pixels, which is the value that we used in our custom tutorial. Click OK. And now we have a little space on either side, which better replicates what happens when our design is sitting inside of a browser. So those are some basic tweaks we can make. Let's zoom in here to get a better sense of what this template file is giving us. And you can see as we zoom in here that not only do we have guidelines for each column, but in between the gutters, and remember there are 20 pixels between the left gutter and then the right gutter on the other side, we have an additional guideline right down the center. So at the 10 pixel mark in between, we have this additional guideline. And that simply provides us another point where we can fix items that we are creating as we build out our wireframes. This isn't necessary as long as we have guidelines for our columns, but it may be helpful to have. The other thing that this template gives us is a visual indication of the columns, which again we may or may not want. If we wanted to turn it off, we could simply change the visibility setting here for the 12-column grid layer in our layers window. So I'll click that to turn it off. And now we just see our guidelines. Let me zoom back out here to 25%. So there we have a file quite a bit like the one that we created from scratch with some extra guidelines built in. You'll notice on either side it's also giving us the guidelines at the beginning and end positions, and that creates that 10 pixel gutter on either side, which can be helpful to think about as well. But remember, we're really just focused on 940 pixels across for our design. So that's some basics on working with the template file from 960.js. Remember, in creating our wireframes, we can either use this template file or whip up a file from scratch. Either way is just fine. And we'll review the particulars on actually creating wireframes in a follow-up video.